All right, today we're going to try and decode the chaos. We're looking at the world through the eyes of Fu Peng, a former hedge fund professional who developed this really powerful framework for understanding the hidden forces that are completely reshaping our world. It connects everything from global politics right down to your own wallet. So let's get into it.
I mean, you've probably felt it, right? This feeling that things are getting more and more chaotic, more unpredictable. It seems like the old rulebook for how the economy and politics are supposed to work has just been thrown out the window. So what on earth is going on?
According to Fu Peng, the real turning point was 2016. He says that's the year everything fundamentally changed. And he's not talking about a small course correction. He's arguing it was a complete break with the past, and if you don't get that, you've got no chance of understanding what's coming next.
So how do you even start to make sense of all this? Well, Fu Peng uses this brilliant mental model he calls the pyramid of power. It's a way to see how the stuff we notice every day is really being driven by these deeper and, frankly, often invisible forces.
Okay, so let's start at the bottom, the base of the pyramid. This is the stuff that gets all the headlines, right? Stock prices, housing markets, financial assets. It's the layer that everyone watches, but in reality, it's just the symptom, the end result of everything happening above it.
So if you move up one level, you get to economics, the big picture. You know, after the 2008 financial crisis, it became crystal clear to investors that you couldn't just look at company stocks. You had to understand the broader macroeconomic trends that were really driving the markets.
And what drives those economic trends and policies? Well, that's politics. Think about it. Elections, the balance of power between different parties, huge policy decisions. These things create the entire economic environment that all of us have to navigate.
But here is where it gets really important. What's at the very top, the peak of the pyramid? Fu Peng argues that this is the most powerful force of all, and it's the one we see the least. It's ideology, the collective mindset, the shared beliefs of a whole society. That's what shapes everything else below it.
And here's the crucial insight. This top layer, ideology, it moves in these really long, slow cycles. Fu Peng's entire case is that the world has just pivoted hard from what he calls a left-wing cycle of globalism and cooperation that lasted for decades to a right-wing cycle of nationalism and self-interest. And this one single shift, it changes all the rules of the game. He uses this pretty clever analogy to explain the dynamic. A left-wing mindset is like saying, "It's all my fault," which allows for cooperation and fixing problems. A right-wing mindset is, "It's all your fault." When you get two your-fault mindsets together in a room or, on the world stage, you get conflict. He says that's the new reality we're living in.
Okay, so that's the big picture framework. But how does it actually play out on the ground? Let's use it as a lens to look at a really critical situation unfolding right now, the incredible squeeze on China's middle class.
20 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to the source, this isn't the story we're used to hearing about rural workers migrating to cities. No, he claims this is a direct symptom of a falling middle class. These are people whose economic fortunes have taken a nosedive, forcing them into gig work just to get by.
And this all leads to something he calls an effective demand crisis. Basically, the group that has the most power to buy things, the middle class, just stops buying. They get worried about the future, so they start saving like crazy, and that grinds the whole economic engine to a halt.
And the data really screams this story. For the first time in more than 20 years, without some huge external shock like a global financial crisis, China's core inflation, which is a really good measure of actual consumer demand, went negative. That's a massive red flag pointing to a deep internal problem.
So what happens when all these companies are fighting over a pie that's actually shrinking? Fu Peng tells this great little story to explain it. Imagine two suitors, both desperately trying to win the affection of a beautiful mate.
So they get locked in this absolutely brutal price war. They're slashing costs, destroying their own profits, and they become completely obsessed with just one thing, beating the other guy. They're convinced that the winner will take everything. But here's the devastating twist. One suitor finally wins. He crushes his rival. He stands up victorious, ready to claim his prize, and the maiden is gone. The customer demand they were fighting over has completely vanished. The point is, in this kind of environment, there are no winners.
There's only mutual destruction.
So if your internal demand is drying up and the global scene is turned hostile, what can a country like China possibly do? The source suggests it's a stark choice. There are really only two paths forward.
Now, lots of people love to compare China today to Japan back in the 1990s. But Fu Peng says, hold on, it's way more complicated than that. Sure, if you look at the household debt, it looks very similar. But almost everything else, the corporate sector, the government's position, and crucially, the international environment, is completely different. A simple repeat of Japan's history just isn't going to happen.
And this leads to a really provocative idea about Japan's lost decades. He argues that Japan found a way forward not through some big new economic boom, but through distribution. He puts it bluntly, as the elderly passed away, their wealth was inherited by the younger generation. The economic pie was essentially resliced. It was a quiet solution based on division, not expansion.
So that brings us to the ultimate choice facing China. Path number one is to go abroad, to fight tooth and nail for a piece of a shrinking global pie in a world that's becoming less and less cooperative. Path number two is to redistribute internally, to start the incredibly difficult political process of dividing the nation's existing wealth in a totally new way.
And this leaves us with a huge final question that goes way beyond any single country. Fu Peng's framework suggests that the great conflict of this century might not be about creating new wealth, but about the messy, painful process of dividing the wealth we already have. Growth versus redistribution. Is this the fundamental choice that every developed nation is eventually going to have to make?